He's an extremely worthy winner of the Beale Medal, and it is a very great pleasure to have him here today to reassure us that the future of OR is present. Hi.
Thanks, John. I'm not sure I really have to say anything after that introduction. Very, very full and good. But I will thank the Operational Research Society for this opportunity to present my work here. And Hilary particularly for scheduling it at close to a weekend where Hull City are playing down in London at the football club at Brentford, so I don't have to make 2 trips down for the football. I'd like to start with a couple of acknowledgements. The talk, of course, the lecture is named after Martin Beale, whose seminal work, Mathematical Programming in Practice, was published in 1968. And the key word there is practice. If you read the first few pages of that book, Beale is absolutely clear that he's not interested in computer programming in order to solve mathematical problems. He is interested in mathematical program for practical problems. And I come from the opposite wing of OR, as it were, which is soft OR from the social sciences side. Then I have the same, I hope, emphasis on practice. I'm only interested in theoretical distinctions as far as they make a difference to practice. The other acknowledgement is to Russ Ackoff, whose paper in 1978 at the New York conference, The Future of OR is Past, was the inspiration for the title of this talk, The Future of OR is Present. And it's apposite, I think, to have that this year, because if Ackoff had lived, he would be 100. He would have been 100. His birthday was on the 9th of February, so 12th of February. So it was only 9 days ago that Ackoff would have been 100 had he been here, and of course he's had a huge impact upon OR. I've got a little bit of history with Ackoff myself, because the first academic paper I ever published was a critique of his work, and I knew he'd read it. So that when I saw him at a conference in Washington, DC, I think it was, I went up to him for acclamation. What do you think of it, Russ? And he turned around and said, I don't think you've understood one word I've ever written. You never did lose that incisive criticism when you were a friend of Russ's, but I think I did become a friend later on in life, and he was extremely supportive of what we were trying to do at Hull in the Centre for Systems Studies, opening the centre and coming many times to visit and talk on behalf of the centre. He used to leave his dinner suit at our house. It was the only place in England he said felt that he needed to wear the damn thing. And we have a lasting legacy in that when he first started coming, we had a new dog, and we were trying to stop it getting on the furniture. But Russ never liked anything more than cuddling up with our dog on the best settee. And therefore we failed. And the dog now occupies all the furniture. And so every day we're reminded of Russ Ackoff when the dog gets on the furniture. Of course, Ackoff's point in 1978 is that he felt that OR had somehow betrayed its original aspirations and intentions. He saw it as being a holistic science, multidisciplinary, aimed at strategic problems in social systems. And he feared that under the influence of academics in universities in the United States, it had become far too mathematical and quantitative and had lost the link with practice. And therefore, in his view, it was stagnating and only able to deal with operational problems was being driven down and out of organisations. He did have some kind words to say for people like Tocker, John Friend and Jonathan Rosenhead, who were pursuing a different version of OR at that time, But overall, his prognosis was gloomy. My talk aims to give a much more optimistic view of OR because I believe that it has overcome and reached out and realised many of the challenges that Ackoff set for it in resurrecting its future, which was the other talk he gave at that 1978 York conference. Just to say a few words about that, it's clear that traditional OR is in good health. Examples are the government OR service, where it still flourishes. You can read articles in Impact about how there is no part of General Motors, for example, that's not influenced by OR. Even in the dynamic fashion world of Zara, there's a recent article which showed the importance of OR there. So traditional OR is in rude health. OR has also responded to some of the challenges and problems that Ackoff set. It's done so because in the UK at least it's maintained its link with practice. It's also looked out to other fields where they have challenged it, like analytics, and now analytics is in the definition of what it is that we do. It's looked to new clients, for example in the Community OR initiative, to also extend its use and extend its methodologies. It's engaged with conversations with systems and with the social sciences, and it's sought to respond to Ackoff's challenges. So the position I'm outlining for OR is that the future of OR is healthy, and it's present in a form that Ackoff would have recognised as extremely good in terms of what his perception of what OR could become. So the talk first sets out the challenge that Ackoff set for OR at that time. It then goes on to what's been achieved, particularly in the complementary area of soft OR, which has given another arrow to the OR, to the OR's kit. Then I want to go on to what I think can be easily added to OR to strengthen it even more. And then once you've got a variety of different systems approaches, OR, soft OR, different forms of systems thinking, you need this critical systems thinking to see how they relate to one another, how they can be used in combination, and how you can employ them together in practice. And then enhanced OR in the digital age. I've noticed that it's de rigueur to talk about artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning at OR conferences, whether you're giving the presidential address, whether you're giving a Beale talk, or whether you're giving the Blackett lecture. It's de rigueur to talk about AI and the digital age. So I will indulge you in that towards the end of the talk. So if you want your fix of the digital age, you'll have to wait till the end. But I will get there eventually. Okay, Ackoff, what he wanted in 1978 was a reconceptualizing of the field. That was in terms of its theory, in terms of its methodology, in terms of its practice, and in terms of the education of OR students. His problem was that he saw society shifting from what he called the machine age to the systems age. And in the systems age of multiple values and of very rapid change, the old predict and prepare paradigm, which dominated OR, he felt was out of date, historical, not fit for the new age. He wanted a form of OR that, as he put it, was about desiring a desirable future, setting out a desirable future, and inventing ways of bringing it about, designing a desirable future and finding ways of bringing it about. He subtitled one of his books, Plan or Be Planned For, and that was the motto of the Mantua ghetto, a huge area of disadvantage, predominantly black in Philadelphia, where Ackoff was working, and where he worked right till the end of his life. In fact, he was attending meetings of the planning group there until 3 weeks before he died with his Zimmer frame. He wanted to design a desirable future and find ways of bringing it about. I'm not sure whether Ackoff actually himself used this phrase from William Blake, but to me it's absolutely spot on in terms of examining what it was that he was trying to insist upon. This comes from William Blake's long poem, Jerusalem. I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. Will not reason or compare, my business is to create. It's plan or be planned for. And in doing that, Ackoff argued that we had to abandon our mechanistic models and our organismic models and to adopt a social systemic approach to underpin operational research. This has set me on my path, I suppose, and here are, over time, just some of the papers and articles and a book where I've addressed this particular issue, because there are more than one social systemic model, and we need to try and work through them to look at what OR could be like. Always different, but always the same, I guess, the message here. That we have a set of systems approaches. OR was fundamental there at the beginning, but there are other forms of systems thinking which you can regard as complementary to OR. Soft OR came about within the OR tradition, but there was also system dynamics, there was also cybernetics as well. And you can advance OR, enhance OR, by looking at the different theoretical positions these different approaches to resolving problems adopted. And if you could learn to use them together in some sort of combination, then you'd be in a much better position to address the sort of multidimensional, complex nature of reality. So the first of those papers, Towards a System of Systems Methodologies with Paul Keyes, set the tone, I think. It said there are a variety of systems approaches. How can we learn to use them in combination? And it was constructive, I believe, in that sense. It was in the context of an OR in crisis debate that was going on at the time. At Hull, we were never sniping at OR or any of the different systems approaches. Some were in the systems community. We weren't. We needed to see how these different approaches could actually work together. And my latest attempt at this is, as John kindly pointed out, this book, Critical Systems Thinking and the Management of Complexity. Now, I know what you're thinking. How can I go and get this book immediately so that I can read it and be up to date with these ideas? And the disappointing news for you is that you can't, because the Scottish printers have let us down. And though the intention was to have copies available for all of you to purchase outside, we are not in that fortunate position. But the good news is that it will be published on the 1st of March, and there are flyers outside which you can use to get 20% off the book when it's published on the 1st of March. So I suppose there's other good news if you don't have to rush out to get the limited copies. It's not there. There's one to look through, but there's not any to buy. We move on from the challenge, perhaps, of Ackoff and the way that I sought to pursue it, to what has actually been achieved. And here I pay tribute to what's become known as soft OR, or problem structuring methods, which have now become established as a complementary set of approaches to more traditional forms of OR. The birth of soft OR goes back, I guess, to the establishment of the Institute for OR which was a joint venture between the Operational Research Society and the Tavistock Institute in 1963. And they were keen in the Institute for OR, or they had really, because they had to make a living, to engage in large-scale, important action research projects where they would have to make OR pay. And one of those projects became associated with the name of John Friend and was conducted in Coventry City Council in a highly politicised environment. And he soon found that some of the traditional methods of OR needed complementing with a different form of approach. And this is what John Friend said. He said, "I found that there wasn't much data of the conventional form that I could analyse and gain insights from. My colleagues and I realised we had to become facilitators of other people, drawing on the information they carried with them in their heads rather than analysts of any kind of data." He was attending lots of meetings, he was looking at political debate, he wanted to facilitate that debate because there was no hard data, you couldn't collect enough data, you couldn't complete data to do a full-scale OR job. But out of that emerged strategic choice, one of the first soft OR approach. And then during the 1970s and the 1980s, alongside strategic choice, people like Jonathan Rosenhead was developing his version of robustness analysis, Colin Eden was introducing SODA, strategic options development and analysis. Peter Checkland's soft systems methodology was born and dragged into the sort of OR domain. And by 1989, Jonathan Rosenhead was able to produce a book of papers on soft OR, which outlined 6 soft OR methods. And what these methods constituted was, Checkland put it most clearly, I guess, but this form of words was also embraced by Jonathan and by John Mingus and by Kirby, the historian of OR, was a paradigm break from the traditional form of OR to soft OR. This new form of work was much more qualitative, it was participative, it sought to be transparent, and it was aimed at problem structuring rather than problem solving. And it extended OR to situations where there were multiple actors, multiple perspectives, incommensurable or conflicting interests, important intangibles and key uncertainties. That's taken from the introduction to Rosenhead Mingus, the second edition of that book on problem structuring. And this is a whole new area of work within which OR can now confidently engage, and is a massive achievement, I think, in terms of operational research in realising the challenge that Ackoff set for it. You'll all be reasonably familiar with that, so I won't say much more about that here. What I'll go on to do instead is to talk about what can be easily added alongside soft OR so that we have an enhanced OR which is suitable for the complexity of the modern world in which we operate. And I say that these things can be easily added because they all started very close to the OR tradition. They all were, if you like, within the OR stable, but at one time or another they bolted and they got away from you and us. And we need to drag them back, bring them back in, see their relevance, see how they relate to traditional OR and soft OR, and make the set of them a really enhanced version of what we're trying to achieve. They're close to OR because socio-technical systems thinking was developed at the Tavistock Institute, where IOR was set up. Emery and Trist, the key people there, worked closely with Ackoff. System dynamics, established by Forrester, the OR Society actually delivers courses on system dynamics, though I'm not sure that it sees it as part of its toolkit. Established by Forrester. There was a practical man for you. He's brought up in a ranch in Arkansas, I think, and he once berated his students at MIT for never looking inside a toilet tank, as he put it. How can you be at MIT if you've never looked inside a toilet cistern? He wanted them to see the feedback system that was there working. In his view, OR could pay its way, management science could pay its way, but it could not by itself get to the heart of why some companies failed and others succeeded. And his system dynamics was designed to get to the heart of that matter. Organizational cybernetics, most closely associated with Stafford Beer. Beer, of course, was an advocate of OR early in his career, one of the main people who pushed it. He became president of this society at one stage in his career. And he argued that OR was suitable for complex probabilistic systems, like production, scheduling, stock control. But he argued we needed something else, organizational cybernetics, for what he called extremely complex probabilistic systems, such as brains and companies and economies. So he developed that cybernetics to try and address that. We need to look at the relationship of that to traditional OR. And then there was, I put them in a different category, but the work of Churchman there, one of the pioneers of OR, who wrote one of the most influential early textbooks on OR with Ackoff and Arnoff, but equally was disillusioned with the way that OR had developed, at least in the United States, and he always wanted it to have a more radical aspect to it. So these are close to the OR. These are close to OR, and we somehow need to get them back in if we're going to realise OR's potential. I've divided them into two sets. The pattern seekers, these are people who look, if you like, for patterns which can enable us to determine how best to organise systems, and the radicals who want to give a more radical edge to operational research. So socio-technical systems thinking is pattern seeking in the sense that it looks to group dynamics. It believes it can understand something about group dynamics and about individual psychology. And on that basis, it could tell you something about how complex socio-technical systems should be designed. Now, looking ahead to the digital age, although socio-technical systems thinking was developed quite some time ago, it was developed at a time of rapidly changing technology in the coal mines, for one, and then the beginnings of the information technology revolution in offices. And what the advocates of socio-technical system thinking argued more than anything else was that we shouldn't be fooled by the notion of technological determinism. There was organisational choice. And if you wanted to get the best out of new technologies, and I'm looking ahead to the digital age, then you had to jointly optimise the technology with the social system in which that was going to be used. And that's important, I think. I was at a conference a month or so ago, and people were talking about AI and the digital age, and it was all about what sort of jobs will be left after the digital age has come about. What type of jobs would still be needed? And I sort of asked the question, well, why don't you start from what type of jobs might be interesting and desirable and useful? And when you're introducing new technologies, as the socio-technical people insisted, then do so in a way that helps to create that kind of job. And then you get joint optimization of the two and greater efficiency and effectiveness. System dynamics, of course, the most important, they look for patterns in terms of feedback loops, positive, negative feedback loops, and lags in the system. The most important work here, I guess, in the early days was the work on limits to growth, where Forrester's work on world dynamics was taken and applied to 5 elements which were seen to determine the way the world system, the global system would operate. And the conclusion was, rather cataclysmically, that the world would undergo a slowdown both in population growth and industrial output some way through the 21st century, in about 50 years' time. It was mocked at the time, people opposed the thinking, but I have to tell you that in 2016, the all-parliamentary group that looks at this in the UK Parliament came to the conclusion that the standard run of the model was still on target, and indeed we would suffer huge population drop and cataclysmic industrial production drop in the two-thirds of the way through this century. Beer's work, perhaps I should spend a little more time on Stafford Beer's work. He wants this, some kind of approach that can deal with exceedingly complex probabilistic systems. These are ones that you cannot predict the behaviour of, nor can you predict the behaviour of their environments. So it's adaptation which is crucial. How do you design things to be adaptive, to be capable of changing in response to things that could not have been predicted in advance? I got a bit of history with Stafford Beer as well, and met him on a few occasions. My usual job was, after he'd got over his brandy and his sherry phase, he used to drink white wine and water. And it was my job often to top up his white wine and water with white wine. And I can tell you it was a full-time job. But the first time I met him was in 1986, and I remember it well because it was the time of the Challenger disaster, and I was at a conference at Manchester Business School where Stafford was performing, 1986. And I was giving a presentation that was a small application of the viable system model, and I was a little bit nervous because Beer himself was going to be there. And I went into the room where my lectern was supposed to be ready for me at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when the talk was scheduled, and it had been moved. My lectern had been moved, and the room was full of powerful music speakers. And I was informed that my talk had been cancelled because Brian Eno of Roxy Music was going to turn up. And he was going to give a demonstration of a systems record. It turned out to be music for airports, which was based upon Stafford Beer's brain of the firm. I didn't realise that Beer had quite such an influence in all realms of art and culture, as well as in OR and cybernetics, but apparently he did. And there are other musicians, Robert Fripp he influenced. I'm told that David Bowie wanted Brain of the Firm as one of his Desert Island books, but I've not been able to verify that, and I've looked for it. So if anybody could find me the source or even the programme in which Bowie refers to Brain of the Firm, then that would be good. Anyway, my talk was cancelled. I've still got a grudge about that. Anyway, Eno. But having said that, Eno, I think this is what Brian Eno says. He says Stafford's book, that was Brain of the Firm, hooked me with one sentence. He said, instead of specifying it in full detail, you simply ride on the dynamics of the system to where you want to go. And the lovely thrill of it was that the system could produce beautiful things which you had never conceived of in advance, which haven't ever existed in any mind. And Eno actually gives the best description of this kind of approach. He used it, of course, for his generative music. You'd set things in motion, some of the parameters by which the music would follow, but then the music took off, and you weren't sure what direction the music would go. He was liberating it from what he said was the autocracy of the composer, and letting it build from the bottom up. In fact, and Eno said this is rather like a comparison between an engineer and a gardener, where the engineer works from the top down to try to design everything in advance, to put everything in place so that it works well. But in the complexity of the situation when you're a gardener, you can't do that because of the soils and the climate and all the other variables which might impact what it is you get. What you can do is your best. You can plant your seeds and your flowers and your plants in some sort of order, in some sort of soils, and see what emerges after a growing season, and then make adaptations after you've seen that. And you will be surprised as well, perhaps gratified that some of the things you'd seeded came up well. You'd also be surprised with the things that you got. And for Beale, it was the same with social systems. You put in place what was required for a social system to be adaptive, what he described in the viable system model, and you then let the social system respond to its environment over time, changing as it did, and you were never quite sure what you were going to get. You steered it, of course, but you were never quite sure what you were going to get. You just simply couldn't predict it. This is powerful stuff, I think. And of course, Beale then says, what we need to do is to look to nature, because anything that's survived in nature has actually evolved and adapted over millennia. And so we can look to nature to be a guide. And for the viable system model, he looked to the human body as organised through the brain and the nervous system, and grabbed that and used that as a model. For when he thought about what a democratic form of organisation should be like, he didn't, unlike Habermas, for example, go through the whole of 19th and 20th century philosophy, looking from Marx to Habermas to English Speech Act philosophy of Searle and Austin. He just grabbed a model, the icosahedron, that he thought represented a possible template for a democratic dialogue, and grabbed that and used it and tried it and see if it worked. This kind of biomimicry or bioengineering is much more common these days, for example, and much more respected these days. It wasn't when Beale started talking about it. And then to move on to the radicals, it's we're aware, not least through the work of Jonathan Rosenhead, that many of the pioneers of operational research were socialists in the period after the war. But OR hasn't really developed a radical edge to its own methodology. And this is what Churchman said about OR in 1970. He said, and it's a paper called OR as a Profession, and he said, the paper expresses a concern about the future of a profession which ought to be in the lead in the growing societal anxiety over poverty, pollution and privacy. Amazingly, he's got privacy in there in 1970. But in fact plays virtually no significant role in these matters. He was concerned about that then. And he was looking to, if you like, an awareness that any systems design was going to be limited, deceptive in some kind of way. So we can't understand the whole system. We draw boundaries. Churchman pointed out that boundaries are not necessarily there in nature. They come from our perception and the way we look at the system. And therefore they can always be deceptive. They can always be limited. We need to reflect on them, be critical about them. Who's included, who's excluded from consideration in drawing boundaries in particular places. You can see you'd have a field day with artificial intelligence. And it's been brought, I think, Alan Wilson in the last Blackett lecture, and Nigel Cummings in a recent issue of Impact talked about the Amazon artificial intelligence model, which decided who to employ on the basis of historical data about who Amazon had employed in the past. And of course, they hadn't employed many women in the past. So it didn't look as though they were worth employing. And so you could see that continuation into the future. The system is designed with a deception, with a bias in it, that somehow you need to unearth and to recognise. So at this part of the talk, I'm at the stage where I've said we've got the strength of traditional OR. What's been achieved is soft OR as a complementary approach to set alongside it. I believe that we need to draw back into the stable of OR those horses which are bolted: socio-technical thinking, system dynamics, organisational cybernetics, and the work of people like Churchman. In order to make sense of that argument, we have, I believe, to look towards what I call critical systems thinking. And this is what we've been developing at Hull since the establishment of the Centre for Systems Studies, which I was the founding director of, and Gerald Midgley was the next director of. He's here today. And Yasmin Morali is the new director of, and she's here today. It involves a kind of second-order analysis to see what the strengths and weaknesses of the different systems approaches are. It involves a kind of pluralism so that we can learn how to use them in combination in order that we can compensate for their different strengths and weaknesses and get the most out of all of them to deal with the multidimensional complexity of the world. And we can use them in a way which, in OR parlance, means that they come together as part of the science of better and bring about improvement in the systems that we're seeking to deal with. We need critical systems thinking to sort this complexity of different systems approaches out, because they inhabit different paradigms, and it's not easy. They're incommensurable sometimes. It's not easy to see how we can do that. Let's look at the problem there. This is from Donella Meadows, a very sophisticated system dynamicist, very closely associated with the limits to growth work. She says that the preeminent leverage point for bringing about desirable change is to keep oneself unattached in the arena of paradigms, to stay flexible, to realise that no paradigm is true, that every one, including the one that severely shapes your own worldview, is tremendously limited understanding of an immense and amazing universe that is far beyond human comprehension. We too easily get locked into the particular paradigms that we find familiar and which we have been educated in. The best expression of this, I think, is in Niklas Luhmann's book, An Introduction to Systems Thinking. He looks at the work of Parsons and the theoretical decisions Parsons makes in looking at the world in a particular way and the results of that for how you might actually act in the world. He looks at those philosophers who study Hegel, who become wrapped in the dialectical method. So their only way of perceiving the world is in terms of the dialectic. They can't see outside that particular box. And he says what we need is a kind of second-order analysis which allows us somehow to get behind so we can understand what's determining the way particular people see the world and the way particular people act. And he uses an example, the work of Cervantes, right, Spanish author, because he says in Cervantes you have Don Quixote behaving according to the rules of chivalry, with his knight, with his lance tilting at windmills. But Cervantes and us stand back, and we can understand Don Quixote's worldview on the basis of our understanding of that chivalric code, which binds the way he thinks about the world and the way he acts in the world. Unfortunately, of course, that worldview with which you're viewing another worldview is also limited. There are no sort of privileged positions from which you can understand all the different perspectives that lie behind different systems approaches, but you can criticise each of them from the point of view of other forms of systems approach. Let me give you an example of second order analysis. This is the Segura River in Murcia in Spain. It's the driest river basin of any in Europe. Still actually produces 20% of the exports of fruit and vegetables from Spain, largely because of fantastic irrigation system put in place initially by the Moors when they were in Spain. In fact, returning to Cervantes, when Don Quixote meets one of the Moors in the book, Don Quixote, that Moor comes from the Ricote Valley, which is where the Segura River is running through here. Anyway, the story I tell you is that in 2012, I just retired, and there were reasons why Pauline, my wife, and I wanted to buy a house in Spain. And we travelled to Murcia, had a quick look round, took a very quick decision, and bought a house next to the Segura River in Murcia, without a lot of pre-planning, I have to say. We got back home and I googled the Segura River. It was the most polluted in Spain. The Google article I found was that there were riots in Murcia because of the state of the Segura River. There was a drought, which meant that there was not much water in the river. Domestic waste was being increasingly put into the river. The canning industry, because of the fruit and vegetables, that was increasing, but that waste was going into the river. Fauna and flora were dying. The banks were degrading. The stench in the villages along the river was appalling, according to this article, particularly where we bought our house. Fortunately, that article was out of date, and by 2012, the Segura was the least polluted river in the whole of Spain. And this is what Bill McCann, one of the people who studied it, says. It must be a rare, if not unique, experience for a nationally important European river to be transformed within 10 years from the most polluted to the best quality in its homeland. But that can be said of the Segura in southeastern Spain. And it's since won many prizes as a systems engineering project, which was carried out by a guy called Miguel Rodinas, who I got to know well. And by 2012, there was not a hint of pollution along the 350 kilometres of the Segura's length. 13% more water in the river. Fauna and flora flourishing. There were international bird reserves. There were bird reserves of international recognition now along that river. There are otters in the river at Murcia. It was a complete turnaround. And water sports were triumphant. I'm actually in that boat. So is my wife, Pauline. I've got the oar. No, I haven't got the oar on the top there. I'm clinging to the people in the middle of the boat. Yeah, it was healthy to have water sports. What had succeeded there was a fantastically well managed systems engineering project. There were 50 new state-of-the-art waste decontamination plants built along the river in the exact best spots, apart from where a little bit of politics had intervened. The river was modelled from source to sea to maintain the flow throughout the river. They were lucky in the sense that all the pollution of the Segura River takes place in Murcia. It rises outside Murcia, but at least in terms of the region, they could handle just that in Murcia. But there had to be immense political will to do this thing, because wastewater decontamination was the job of the local authorities. And they had to change that and make that the role of a regional water authority to do and undertake this systems engineering project. Further, they had to push through the Mercian Parliament a bill that would allow monitoring of waste as it effluent, as it flowed from canning factories, etc. Put in place fines if people exceeded what they were supposed to do. Now, the critical systems question, the second order analysis, asks why did this project succeed in those circumstances? And the answers, as I've hinted at, are the boundary, the physical boundary of the river was there, could be managed. The political will was there. Everybody was led to agree that this was a thing that needed doing, and they went ahead and were able to do it. Now imagine that kind of systems approach transferred to another Spanish problem, the problem of Catalonia and the potential independence of Catalonia. It wouldn't have worked. It'd have had no chance. I've seen discussions of how to manage the Catalonian problem using a system of systems approach, using Stafford Beer's viable system model, using Warfield's interactive management. Well, good luck with that. It's not going to happen. It's a problem of massive complexity involving Spain and the Catalan region, involving those in Catalan in favour of independence, those who are not, with the complications of the European Union. I'm not saying that OR or enhanced OR couldn't help in that situation, but it would be a different kind of approach. And you need to understand the differences between the different approaches to get anywhere close to understanding when some will work and some won't. The second thing I mentioned as part of critical systems thinking was pluralism. These different approaches, all of which have value, are based upon different theoretical perspectives. And we have to know what they're good at and what they're not, and what they're not good at. In practice, it's a matter of learning in the actual situation what's going to work for you. But we can give some kind of guidance. Some people like grids and frameworks. Other people put up with them. Some people hate them. I love them, personally, because I think they're a good place to start your thinking. So here's the latest version of what was originally called System of Systems methodologies. And it's trying to place some important systems approaches in terms of what aspects of complexity they privilege. So down the bottom there, the bottom left, as you look at it, I put hard systems thinking like systems engineering, which works well if you can model the system of concern, as they could with the Segura River, and if you can establish unitary agreement about what it is that you're seeking to achieve. Clearly, something like soft OR doesn't rest upon that set of assumptions. It rests upon, as we said, assumptions about pluralism, about different worldviews, about key uncertainties, and adopts a different kind of approach in managing that form of pluralism in order to bring us towards more structured appreciations of problem situations. The viable system models up there as a way of dealing with unpredictability in complex situations where you think you know what you can design into the system in order to steer it to what works. Once you've got this set of things, then you're talking in terms of multi-methodology. You're talking about how can we use these things in some sort of combination. In 1997, John Mingus and Anthony Gill came up with a set of papers in a book called Multi-Methodology, and which was, I guess, a key set of papers, and they were derived partly from OR practice. There was people like Richard Ormerod using these things in consultancy practice together, partly from critical systems thinking, the work we were doing in critical systems thinking, looking at how they could work together. And again, that's what we've been working at Hull, people like myself and Joel Midgley and also John Mingus in Kent, how you actually, at Kent University, how you can use different approaches in this way. Okay, the digital age fix, for those who've been waiting for this final aspect of the talk. And I'm using this as an example to try and bring together the ideas that I've been discussing. And I'm not about no means. We have to cope with this digital future. I'm by no means a Luddite. It's a matter of getting the greatest benefit from these technologies, these new technologies that are coming about. I'm absolutely happy to have medical diagnosis enhanced by artificial intelligence. I love Amazon. I love getting my books on time. And it's so easy to order. I've got a personal assistant that plays me music. And as I get even older, I'll be happy with any other kind of personal assistants or whatever they can do. I'm not no means a Luddite. And to start with, I'd like to emphasise, which our current president emphasised in his presidential talk, I think, that there is a marriage in many ways between these new technologies and artificial intelligence and the traditional OR methodology. One of the big problems we have in this country is the productivity gap. Whatever we do, we don't seem to have overcome that productivity gap. And the traditional OR methodology, I believe, can play a role, as John has argued. It has potential to increase efficiency and to drive productivity improvements. And that must be highly valued. But I would add just this, that there is a danger if we concentrate on OR's traditional approach as a means of helping AI, new technologies, etc. We don't develop OR because there is a resonance, a congruence between what AI does well and what traditional OR does well. John Wiley Sons, a colleague of Ackoff, put this well, I think. He said, but both traditional OR and AI, if they're going to succeed then they need to, you need large and complete data sets to be available. The issues need to be well defined, and ethical concerns need to be less critical. If that situation holds, then OR, with its traditional methodology, can play that role in assisting these new technologies to increase productivity and efficiency. But there's a danger. And my argument is, on the basis of this enhanced OR, that to be really significant in the coming digital age, we need also to overcome many of the problems that have been highlighted by John, by Alan Wilson in a previous talk, and by many commentators, many of the problems that also exist and the dangers that exist with the new technologies and the digital age. And it's some of these other aspects to an enhanced OR which are capable of doing these things. Some of them I've alluded to already. Avoid technological determinism, and I said socio-technical thinking can help with that. Let's not use these things and then ask after the event have they brought any benefits. Jointly optimise them, the social and the technological system, and then you get the greatest benefit. We can use soft OR to debate the purposes for which the technology is being used. Surely proper to debate what we're using these technologies for, not take it as a given that they will bring benefit to people. We can use soft OR to democratise the development and employment of artificial intelligence. So only 20% of the developers of artificial intelligence in the UK are women. You've got an inbuilt bias there already. Avoid unintended Kafkaesque consequences, as AI is just used to bureaucratise systems. I hark back to system dynamics here. There was A recent OECD report said that one of the best known examples of system dynamics was the work done by David Lane for the Monroe report, which studied how bureaucratising the system that dealt with child protection led to a commitment to a prescriptive regime which took away professional judgment from the social workers. And this was itself reinforcing. And you can imagine how an unthought AI or machine learning system could do exactly the same. We need that professional judgment as well. Organisational cybernetics, see that humans are the masters, not the machines. There was an article in the New Statesman last year which looked at some early work of Stafford Beers, in which, and the article said, this work anticipated the internet and it anticipated big data years in advance, but it did so in the context of a daringly alternative order, as Eaton, the author of that paper, put it. Here, these technologies were used to benefit people, or clearly to benefit human purposes, rather than developing without thought to that particular issue. And the radical wing of it to introduce the churchman type thinking, what biases are entering in, what boundaries are we drawing. Ulrich's work is a kind of critical systems heuristics, is a way of actually doing that. So if we can bring together traditional skills of OR as a methodology for enhancing productivity and efficiency with the soft OR emphasis upon democratization and debate, and with some of these other strands which are bolted but which we can draw back in, then we can be really important, successful and useful in the digital age. And OR will realise its potential. It's there to grasp, and we will benefit society through the proper use of these new digital technologies. So I will now conclude. I'm getting on a bit, so idealistic statements don't come easy to me. But I'll make a sort of idealistic statement as a conclusion. I'll take you back to Ackoff and Blake and the New Jerusalem, the creative system or be enslaved by another man's, but also to the Olympic opening ceremony, 2012. Some of you may have even been there, and you'll remember in that opening ceremony that there's England's green and pleasant land is suddenly broken apart by the chimneys arising at the time of the Industrial Revolution. The noise and the mess and the dynamism as those things happen. That part of the programme was called the pandemonium. It's a word invented by Dante, which he gave to his capital of hell in his book. And you could see the hell in that. But Danny Boyle also then alluded to the digital age, which was coming, and particularly to Tim Berners-Lee and the invention of the World Wide Web in 1989. Danny Boyle had it. And here's another age, the digital age, which is going to have equally important impacts upon us, as did the Industrial Revolution. And there's a hint in there, I think, of Boyle asking, can we manage this digital age any better than perhaps we manage the industrial age? And he comes up with a thought, what he calls a thread, which you can see running through, which is all the best things that we did as part of the prosperity that the Industrial Revolution brought, and which we might do in terms of what the digital age might bring. And those, of course, were in things like the National Health Service was his key example, of course, in the Olympic opening ceremony. And Boyle said, we can get, these are massive changes, huge changes, but you can perhaps discern something there, progressive and important. And he said, by discerning and developing a single golden thread of purpose, we can perhaps capture what this all needs to be about, what we need to cling on to through these massive changes. And that is a belief that we can build Jerusalem, this is in his programme notes, Danny Boyle, and that it will be for everyone. A bit of idealism there. And then he refers to what we need to do to build this Jerusalem, which are the potential for increased prosperity, to which OR can contribute. The notion of better communication between all those involved with the developments and others affected by them. And freedom and equality for all is what he hoped to see if we clung on to this particular thread. And I hope I've illustrated that OR can actually contribute to all those things: prosperity, increased communication, greater equality and freedom. And if it does so, then perhaps it can play a role in discerning and developing that single golden thread of purpose. And, as Boyle had it, we can build on the belief that a new Jerusalem is possible and that it will be for everyone. Thank you.